Okay, hello ladies and gentlemen, boys over here, and welcome back to another live stream. Don't mind the background noise, just don't pay attention to it. I just got back home, and I just wanted to get this taken care of because I've waited all day to do this, and now we can finally take care of it. And I say that because I had to work today. Nice day at work, by the way. Nice, not the worst, not the best, not the worst. Yeah, it wasn't too bad of a day, and I know this light right here is right here where my hand's at is kind of a pain in the ass. Oh, no, I wish I could take care of it, but I can't. So I wanna, like right here, I guess, but then you'd be dealing with all kinds of stuff right here. But better to deal with it than with it being, you know what I mean. In any event, we are finally doing the finale of Jim Ross's book, My Life, Slobberknocker, My Life in Wrestling. This was the first of two books that he wrote, with the second one being the sequel, and at that point being a bit more up to date, with his life going on. So with that being said, I'm finally ready to do this. So without further ado, let's begin. Oh wait, I almost forgot to do what I usually do. Gotta take the cover off because this usually gets in my way. Alright. Chapter 54, Talent, 1996. With Hall and Nash debuting for the competition in such grand fashion and more defections coming, Vince wanted to turn the tide, or at least stem it. The first man we signed to a guaranteed contract was Brian Pillman, who had been a featured player in WCW since I brought him in back in 1989. Brian and Steve Austin had been close since their days as the Hollywood Blondes tag team in WCW. They had much in common, especially that they were starving to be top stars and were willing to go through whatever necessary to achieve that goal. Brian had a brilliant mind and was an extraordinary athlete. But Brian lived in the fast lane and was a party guy. Not long after WWF signed him, Brian got into a serious wreck on his Humvee and it shattered his ankle and left him in a coma. When he regained consciousness about a week later, the only remedy available to fix his ankle would cost Pillman the mobility in the ring for which he was known. Brian never got over the fact that having his ankle fused in place had ended his wrestling career, not unlike what Kerry Von Erich had his foot partially amputated after a motorcycle wreck a decade earlier. However, we knew that, unlike Kerry, Brian was an excellent talker, and he decided that he was smart enough to figure out how to work around having a fused ankle, and still have an in-ring career. But it just wasn't working. He and I broadcast some shows together while he was on crutches. He was exceptional, and I tried to sell him on the idea of being the next Jesse Ventura. He was smart, understood the business, sports, and politics. Plus, he had a good look and a unique, raspy voice. No one would mistake him for anyone else. He could have had a gig for years. But Brian resisted, hell-bent on being a wrestling star, as painful as it was for him to work. The pain led him to some clinical shortcuts, and I got reports from agents at house shows that he was actively irrational, curling up and sleeping in the locker room. I even had wrestlers who were friends of his, and those were plentiful because Brian was as likable a guy as you were going to find in the business, telling me something wasn't right with him. It was clear that he needed help, so I had a drug tester show up at a house show in the Pacific Northwest to administer a test for Brian. Late that night, the phone rang at the little one-bedroom apartment Jen and I were renting in Stamford. It was Pillman, and he sounded violently mad. He shouted, "I can't believe you're doing this. I thought we were friends. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not taking any drugs. I just said, well then when the test comes back clean, everyone will know you're good. Regrettably, his urine didn't back up his words. Both Rodney Anoa'i, Yokozuna, and Vader had weight issues that were every bit as hard to manage as someone else's drug problems. Yokozuna had been with the company for about 4 years and captured the world title on my first night broadcasting for WWF WrestleMania 9. At the time, he had a mobility that belied his 500 plus pounds, but now he was threatening to break the 700-pound barrier. We sent him to the Duke University Weight Clinic, one of the more heralded programs in the country, alongside one of his in-ring rivals, Vader. Leon White was still as tough as ever, but after years of working such a punishing style, he had put on some pounds. Both men found that intensive weight loss programs are almost like rehab for drugs and alcohol, in that they have you more totally rethink how to approach some basic parts of your life. They had to relearn nutrition and how to power their bodies in less destructive ways. The issue was, any wrestler could be awesome in the ring and charismatic as hell, but if he's not reliable, then a promoter couldn't put those attributes to use. And as those guys continued to gain weight, it adversely affected their health and general well-being. I didn't want either man getting into an irreversible situation. The second issue was the athletic commissions. The weights of these mammoths affected their heart rates and blood pressure, and there was a risk that these numbers would exceed what commission doctors would approve for active wrestlers. If a wrestler was deemed unfit to compete in one state, it was pretty much automatic that he'd also be barred in any other state where a commission governed wrestling. We couldn't keep investing TV time and money in guys who could lose their ability to wrestle with one bad exam, so we had to send them to a place where they could lose weight. Unfortunately, it didn't work. We were getting reports back that Leon and Rodney would slip out at night and hit a fast food drive-through somewhere. We didn't know exactly what they were doing, but I did know that when I got their progress reports, there wasn't a lot of progress. It was frustrating to learn that they were gaining weight from week to week, as the threat of really bad health, getting barred from competing, and losing the boss's trust were all peering over their shoulders. Rodney had an eating disorder, and it was sad that he never got it under control. Of all the super heavyweights I've seen, Vader was the most athletic, but Yokozuna had uncanny timing and great ring psychology. But we had these two awesome main eventers who were on the verge of being declared ineligible. We offered Yokozuna gastric bypass surgery and other procedures, but he had no desire to do it. Vader did manage to get his weight down some, and he came back ready for another run. When I watched him out there, I couldn't help but wish we'd gotten Vader before years of Japanese and WCW World title matches, and that strong style had beaten up his body. But we had to let Rodney go. The worst part wasn't the loss of a great performer from our rings. It was knowing that this guy, who was so well liked, was heading for major health troubles. Even though our roster was beginning to click, we were running out of opponents for The Undertaker. He polished off Diesel at WrestleMania 12, capping off a run of a few years during which it felt like he had conquered every big man in wrestling. Although he was 300 pounds, Mick Foley was a different kind of opponent for him. I was well aware that he had tried to get work with WWF on multiple occasions, and it didn't work out, but I convinced Vince to hire him for Undertaker. "Alright," McMahon said. "I'm gonna let you bring Foley in, because I want you to learn how it feels to have your heart broken by a character you think is gonna be a star, and then it ends up being the shits." I also knew WWF would benefit by having Mick in the locker room, offering an encouraging word to impressionable young talents, or a little advice, or maybe just a joke or funny story to lift the spirits of the boys. Some of our older stars had recurring bad habits that they needed to get a grip on and were barely in a position to lead themselves, much less the locker room. They didn't have the self-discipline you wanted others to emulate. It wasn't everybody, by any means, but there were enough in the locker room that were not the role models that we wanted the new guys to look up to. Vince and I knew that we needed to get younger. It was one of my challenges to find new talent that we could groom and fast track to get on that roster sooner than not. But they needed to come to that locker room and be around people that could give them leadership, and Mick was a devout family man. He wasn't a drug user. He didn't have a drinking problem. I couldn't even remember seeing Mick take a drink ever. He had family values. He had a genuine love for the business, and he had compassion for other human beings. He was legitimate. You get enough of those guys, then you create a completely different environment backstage. Another guy I felt could be a leader in a completely different way was Steve Austin. Every time Austin had worked with a top guy in WCW, he had more than held his own. At 6'2", 245 pounds, he had a good look and was hungry. In my conversations with him, he had a burning desire to be great and was never satisfied with his own work. In terms of recruiting talent, there was zero to not like. The matches Steve had with Ricky Steamboat were spectacular, and Austin was passionate about being a heel. Plus, he trained himself like a badass. I mean, he walked around backstage, walked into catering like a badass, walked to the ring the same way, wrestled, and walked out that way too. It was real. He was coming to whip your ass, and his face told that story. Starting the WWF, it was just a matter of finding the right persona for him to find his potential. His first one was the Ringmaster. The idea was that he was a technician who was master of the ring, and he was the $1 million champion accompanied to the ring by manager Ted DiBiase. Steve didn't like it. He thought the name was hokey, and he didn't want a manager. That had nothing to do with any feelings about Ted DiBiase. He just wanted to cut his own promos. He also thought the whole thing was a dig at him, a way of saying, "We know you're mechanically sound, but that's about it because you really can't speak and you really don't have any personality, so you can be the ringmaster." I knew that notion was wrong, that Steve had a marketable personality waiting to come out. He'd shown glimpses of it in ECW, where he'd spent a few months after being fired from WCW. In ECW, he cut funny, bitter promos about how he'd been overlooked for years. It was a different side of him that anyone had seen before, unless you'd seen him with him and Pillman at a bar, laughing and cutting up. I'd seen it a few times, so I knew it was there. "Steve, one day, you're going to be a hell of a babyface," I said to him backstage. "What did you say?" he replied. By the look on his face, you'd have thought I'd just burned his house down. You heard me. You're going to make a lot of money as a babyface." He cussed at me, around me, through me. He cussed my opinion, the company, and anyone who thought he had any babyface in him. He said, "How stupid can you some bitches be? I'm a heel. God damn it, I was born to be a heel. That's what I want to be." I calmly told him, "Hey, be whoever you want to be, but ultimately the people who buy the tickets are going to decide whether you're a heel. And by the way, some of Hogan's biggest years came from selling t-shirts and gimmicks. That's bump-free money. But hey, you know a lot more about this than I do, so I'm sure you'll make a lot of money selling merchandise as a despised heel." After that, he changed his tone a little bit, and I could see the wheels turning. But even if he had insisted on remaining a heel, the fans were very slowly turning him babyface. Austin exemplified what I was trying to do as a head of the talent relations department. WCW was featuring past WWF main eventers to great effect, but we were assembling guys who were hungry for success, who, from bell to bell, could get the job done. And I knew Austin could do it because I had called his WCW matches in the early 1990s, and in that whole time we were together in WCW, we were friendly, but not what I'd call friends. But that was about to change. "Hey Jim, my year-to-date money isn't what I think it should be. Austin said after our King of the Ring pay-per-view, in which he'd been crowned king. I was hoping for more. I'm working hard, getting over. I told him, wait right here. I'll go talk to Vince now, right now. Austin had just cut the blistering Austin 316 promo at King of the Ring that I knew Vince loved. Vince and I both knew Steve was going to be pretty special, but Steve was not happy because he felt undervalued, underappreciated. In case you don't know what the promo is, he did a promo after he defeated Jake the Snake Roberts in the finals of the King of the Ring tournament. And one part of what he said in that promo was, "You sit there and you thump your Bibles, and it didn't get you anywhere. Talk about your Psalms, talk about John 3:16. Austin 3:16 says, I just whipped your ass." And and Hayes, who was the interviewer for that moment, he's just looking around like, did he just say that on TV? And even Vince on the camera was like, we do not condone that type of language on this television. I just want to assure the audience at home that we do not condone that kind of language on television. But yet, this promo that he did at King of the Ring 1996 would basically be the start of him being this anti-corporate wrestler. If the company said, don't do this, don't do that, he's going to basically flip him off and say, fuck you, I am going to do this, whether you motherfuckers like it or not. And so he would be the anti-establishment character. And it was because of this character that Steve Austin would become more and more popular as the years went on, to the point to where by WrestleMania 13, when he did that submission match with Bret Hart, he was so over with the crowd that WWE, regardless of who thought it was a good idea at the time, thought to have this man do a double turn with Bret Hart, to where Hart would be the fan favorite turning heel, and Austin would be the heel turning into a fan favorite. And so Austin would continue to be popular by that point, up until I would say Survivor Series in 1999. Because by that point, at that moment, that night, he in storyline got run over, when it was really just to write him off because he had some injuries he had to take care of. And so for all of 2000, The Rock was becoming more and more popular as well, after his 1999 rivalry with Stone Cold Steve Austin at WrestleMania 15 and at Backlash. So then after that, The Rock was getting more and more popular because they decided to turn him into a fan favorite after Backlash 1999, and he would just be the popular fan favorite second to Stone Cold Steve Austin. And then when Steve Austin got injured, the fans turned to The Rock for the most part. And by the time Austin came back, the two of them were practically equally as popular, if not Austin a bit more so than The Rock still. But then as time went on, The Rock started becoming more popular than even Steve Austin. Yeah, it's just a bit of history lesson on that one. Moving on. I walked into Vince's office and said, Austin's out there and he's fucking fuming. Vince and I went through his deal, which was a fairly standard contract for a mid-card guy with solid skills and a fair amount of experience, which was how the company had viewed Austin when he came in. It was now clear Austin would be more than Vince had originally thought, and Stone Cold had quickly figured out that he was worth more than his original contract. Vince asked me what it would take to make him happy. I gave him a number that was much healthier than Austin's original deal called for. Without missing a beat, Vince said, "Do it." I went back to Austin and said, okay, let's just tear up your original contract and sign you into a new one. It won't be the last contract you get. That was what he wanted to hear, and for Austin, it wasn't just a matter of dollars and cents. He liked knowing that he was appreciated. You know, in WCW I injured my arm and they fired me with a FedEx, Steve said. I'm not like WCW, Steve. Austin smiled. It was a very, very rare occurrence. He saw that we cared about his issues and were willing to solve his problems immediately, without any BS, without any corporate runaround, without scheduling a series of meetings. He put out his hand for me to shake. You're all right, man. And with that handshake, we began to understand each other a little better. Chapter 55. The Black Hat. January 1997. Vince took one look at me in the hat and said, "That's a good look. I like that." I pretty much gave up the fight at Vince becoming good old JR, as the Royal Rumble was to be held at the San Antonio Alamo Dome. It was just too long a fight in a place that was all awash in cowboy hats. Vince felt that, whether stereotypical or not, the hat would make me look like I sounded a rural Southwesterner. I understand the thought process, but just so you know, not everyone in Oklahoma wears a hat. Vince said, Jim Ross, JR, we're stereotypes, and you happen to be Oklahoman. Rural, ranchers, fun fights. So now that you're wearing the hat, you look like you sound. And I hated to admit it, but that really did fill in the missing piece of my public persona. The only thing negative that was I remembered Randy Savage wearing those hats, and he always traveled with a hat bag. I decided there and then that if I was going to have a hat, I was just going to wear mine. After Vince left, I quietly remembered the first time anybody ever mentioned I should wear a hat. It was Jesse Ventura in 1992 when we were working the Super Brawl 2 pay-per-view for WCW. He even called me JR in a throwaway remark. Little did he know how prophetic it would be over the course of time. I was used to wearing a ball cap a lot, but I never wore a cowboy hat as a kid growing up, or as a young adult, or nothing. My dad did. My grandpa did. But I didn't. Maybe I was being defiant, or I didn't want to be a cowboy. I didn't want to be that farmer. I didn't want to wear a hat. Waiting to go out on pay-per-view, I thought of my father. I was happy I took the time to fly down to Stillwell to see him more, to talk more. We got the chance to make up and understand each other. Instead of running from what I didn't want to be, I started to embrace more what I did want to be. Hat and all. I already know where this is going, so we're going to put on the emotional music. Chapter 56. So long, Dad. February 1997. I was home with Jan watching Raw when my phone rang. It was a collect call from Stillwell, where my father lived. As I waited for the person on the other end to talk, I saw the Legion of Doom return to WWF on my screen. Hello? Said the voice on the line. Is this Jim Ross? Hearing such a question over the phone sent a little shiver down my spine. It is, I said. Can I help you? This is your father's neighbor calling, said the voice. I'm afraid he's had a heart attack when they've life-flighted him to St. Francis's in Tulsa. What? Jan could see by my face that something was horribly wrong. I'm sorry. I'll call you back when I find out more, said the man on the line. And then he hung up. I didn't know what to do. Should I get a flight? Wait by the phone? Call the hospital? Call my mom? I explained to Jan what was happening, and we both sat staring at the phone until it rang again 30 minutes later. Same collect call, same voice of an older gentleman on the other end. "Hello," he said again. "How is he?" I asked. "I'm afraid your father didn't make it. I'm sorry." After those words, I'm sure we said some other things to each other, but I couldn't remember what. Jan took the phone from my hand when the call was over. She could hear what happened. I sat in shock and my face found raw, muted on my TV screen. Jan tried to console me, tell me we'd go through this together, but all I saw was my big old man. His hands, the dollar for a haircut, the silent fishing by the pool. The last time I saw him, he still looked huge and healthy, and now he was gone. And I didn't get to say goodbye. I didn't get to say some things I wanted to say. All the strength in the world and couldn't get to him past his 64th birthday. When I got to the funeral home, his wife hadn't decided on what my dad should wear. So he lay on the table, covered in a white sheet, but otherwise naked. My father alone in the room, without any clothes, and no one to make sure he was being looked after. The sight of him there stayed with me. He was a tough bastard. He was my hero. My John Wayne. And now my hero was gone. Chapter 57. Sitting Down with Foley. May 1997. Mick Foley was as smart as they came. He was quick-witted, introspective, measured, kind, thoughtful, and sensitive in his own way. The character he played on TV, however, was none of those things. I knew Vince didn't know much about Mick. He knew the look, but not the work. He'd heard about the wild stunts, but not of the man doing them. Mick's in-ring work already was solid. Some of the stuff that he did was ill-advised, albeit spectacular. I never did enjoy those insane bumps, though. Personally, I always felt like he was destroying himself, as the body's not meant to take that kind of abuse. The ring is hard enough on the human body. I knew from looking at a lot of the old-timers who used walkers and canes that taking bumps in the ring over a period of time is destructive enough, much less taking bumps on the concrete floor. Although Mick had come in and done a great job, we thought it was time to add a little backstory and humanity to his character, Mankind. I knew Mick personally. I knew his real-life character. I knew his heart. I knew where all that was. There was an intangible there that I felt could make him even more successful. But the dilemma was how do we show the world what I knew to be true? How do we invite our audience to know the man under the brown leather mask? We take a risk. We try something different. We sit down and we talk. We've done all kinds of interviews before. Some in the ring, some backstage, some live, some not. But we've never done an interview where the character and the person playing that character became intertwined as the interview rolled out. Going in, all we knew was two things. The first was that the overarching question we wanted to cover. How do you go from being a Long Island educator's son to a scared sadistic lunatic who rips out his own hair before mauling people? The second was the ending. Everything else was on the fly. Through the course of the taping, we traced Mick's love of wrestling and his tough road into the business. We talked about his childhood, the reasons he came to be who he was, as clips of a young Foley filled the screen. Knowing where it was heading, we let it get there organically as he talked about feelings of rejection and being an outcast, both in his youth and later in the wrestling business. It was new ground for us, and I could feel the extra pressure of knowing that Vince was watching from the darkness, just off camera. I vouched for Mick continually when I wasn't head of talent. Now that I was, Mick and I were literally under the lights, about to find out if Vince was right about Mick's character being my first failure. Finally, my questioning led to the moment of truth, where I asked him if he could admit he was responsible for his issues. Don't you think it's about time in your life where you look squarely in the mirror and accepted personal responsibility for who you are? Don't you believe that you yourself have caused or brought on all these problems? And with that, he snapped, yelling at me and laying me out with his paralyzing finishing move, the mandible claw. People off camera were screaming and freaking out, as planned. The key to my end of it was to remain largely quiet. I wanted Mankind to be so vicious and his finishing move to be so dangerous that when he locked onto you, there was nothing you could do. Not even scream. Not even shout. You could do nothing but just lay there as paralysis set in. When he finally let go, fully out of the line, that shout showed the humanity beneath the sadist, saying as he staggered away, Jimmy, Jimmy, uh, he's gonna need some help. By planting the seeds of him being human, under all that craziness, Foley turned the corner from being a compelling villain to a full-time formed character. To a full-formed character, who the fans could understand or detest as the storyline called for it. From my unconscious position on the floor, I could see that Vince was enthralled by what he saw from Mick. I knew by the mere look on the boss's face that we had broken new ground and that Vince could see the potential of Foley as a weekly TV character. Mick had positioned Mankind as an obsessed wrestling fan who saw himself as a handsome, grandiose babyface headlining Madison Square Garden. But everything went haywire, and he instead became this Mankind character. Vince's creative wheels began turning almost immediately. I have a vision for what this guy could I have a vision for what this guy could be, and he said as we left the room. I think the boss began to see both Mick and me in a different light. And live on Raw, over 4 episodes, the interview aired. After that, I think the fans started seeing Mick in a different light as well. Chapter 58, Pillman, October 1997. There was a big adjustment because everything else in my life, doctor visits, family matters, everything, had to be scheduled around the show when it was live. And with the competition from WCW, WWF decided it was going to live more often, going to go live more often. There were very few times when Jan and I could slip away for a long weekend, and trying to book a vacation was a complete no-no. We were in the trenches, battling for ratings and available talent. If Vince McMahon's work ethic was insane before, it was otherworldly now that he felt the heat of true competition down his neck. He never felt like WCW were trying to compete with him. He felt they were trying to put him out of business. That meant that no one could take their eye off of the ball. No breaks, no rests, and no retreat. Even when I'd come home late at night, the phone was always in arm's reach, and there was always someone on the other line with an issue. Some of those issues I got to hear about at home and some on the road. We were in St. Louis getting ready for that night's Bad Blood pay-per-view when we got the news about Brian Pillman's passing. He had been found dead in his hotel room in Minnesota, where he had wrestled the previous night. Vince and I flew to Cincinnati to see his family, as we both wanted to pay our respects. We visited his wake, which was a little more convivial than your typical memorial service, with stories and memories of Brian being shared. He had the casket open, and it hurt me deeply to see Brian lying there. The part I found the hardest about running the talent department was keeping a distance from the wrestlers. I got too close to some of the guys, and when tragedy struck, it was like losing a family member. That's been kind of loud and more fitting for like something involving war. You know, like a war moment, like a war story. That's what it sounds like. So we're actually gonna we're actually gonna read that whole bit again because I feel like this music would be more fitting for it. Chapter 58, Pillman, October 1997. There was a big adjustment because everything else in my life, doctor visits, family matters, everything, had to be scheduled around the show when it was live. And when the competition from WCW, WWF decided it was going to go live more often. There were very few times when Jan and I could slip away for a long weekend, and trying to book a vacation was a complete no-no. We were in the trenches battling for ratings and available talent. If Vince McMahon's work ethic was insane before, it was otherworldly now that he felt the heat of true competition down his neck. He never felt like WCW were trying to compete with him. He felt they were trying to put him out of business. That meant that no one could take their eye off the ball. No breaks, no rests, and no retreat. Even when I'd come home late at night, the phone was always in arm's reach, and there was always someone on the other line with an issue. Some of those issues I got to hear about at home, and some on the road. We were in St. Louis. Hold on. We were in St. Louis getting ready for that night's Bad Blood pay-per-view when we got the news about Brian Pillman's passing. He had been found dead in his hotel room in Minnesota, where he had wrestled the previous night. Vince and I flew to Cincinnati to see his family, as we both wanted to pay our respects. We visited his wake, which was a little more convivial than your typical memorial service, with stories and memories of Brian being shared. They had the casket open, and it hurt me deeply to see Brian lying there. The part I found the hardest about running the talent department was keeping a distance from the wrestlers. I got too close to some of the guys, and when tragedy struck, it was like losing a family member. Brian Pillman had been like a little brother to me, a mischievous kid. Even though I knew relationships in the wrestling business were often fleeting, I felt a kinship to Brian. He could talk to you intelligently about a variety of topics. He was a real Renaissance man, the opposite of many people's image of a dumb old wrestler. He had just had trouble controlling his social urges, and sometimes the guilt he derived from that could also become an issue. He was often in a great mood until he thought about what he had done or said 2 nights before, and then he made himself miserable about it. He was often his own burden, and despite his image as a wild man, Brian was not using drugs, in my opinion, for recreational purposes. He was taking the medications to help him heal from that awful accident, but it was medication that still was against company policy. When I said you're gonna get your heart broken, Vince said on the flight back, I simply meant don't get too close to the boys. Ironically, Linda McMahon had once told me the same thing regarding Vince. Don't get too close to the flame, she said. Chapter 59, Montreal, November 1997. Not 98 like the book says, it was actually November 1997. I was sequestered in Vince's office backstage at the Molson Center in Montreal, Canada. A security guard walked me to the door on Vince's insistence. They told me not to leave until I physically locked myself in. Outside, I could hear disturbing sounds of shouting, arguing, and utter confusion as to what had just happened. I kept running the finish of the match over and over in my head. What did this mean for the title? What did it mean for the company? What did it mean for Brett and Sean? Their simmering personal real-life feud had just peaked live on pay-per-view, and the aftermath was playing out just beyond the door I was told not to open. A lot of us could see that the tension between both men would end up doing neither any favors. But no one saw this coming. At least I certainly didn't, although it was a long time brewing in the background. Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart were two of the best. They came up through the ranks together, and in many ways their paths ran parallel. Both men were amazing performers. Both men had the necessary ego that came with that. Both men in the end let those same egos guide them into trouble. As their professional conflicts got personal, both men tended to take their issues straight to Vince. Jeez. Sean already had a rapport with the boss, so I tried to avoid his issues as much as I could. I knew Sean was a good-hearted human being, but the person that he had become was not a professional, likable version of himself. His behaviors were a product of feeling the continuous pressure to be the best while mixing in too many medications he was taking to deal with the pain from years of bumps. He was certainly not unique in that regard. Like so many of the guys, the physicality took a toll, and handling it with a medication often affected the thought process, leading to sometimes unsound decision making. Shawn left in early 1997 after vacating the world title. He gave a TV interview in which he said he needed to time off because I lost my smile. The bottom line was that Shawn needed time off to get help, and like Vince always said, if we can't solve the problem, we can always eliminate it. I was dealing with guys on the roster who wanted to know why Michaels had left so abruptly, and I quickly reached the point where I just started telling them that the reason didn't matter. The only issue that mattered was who was going to step up. WWF business wasn't exactly on fire, and I knew we had other talented guys on the roster. A lot of them had a chance. My job was to make sure the talent was ready and keep them focused on making the most of every minute they were on TV. It didn't matter if it was a long match, a short interview, or anything else. Every minute they were on the air was a chance to show Vince why the company should invest in them. Shawn's departure from the main event picture also meant the reshuffling of WrestleMania 13. Instead of a title rematch against Shawn, former champ Bret Hitman Hart would now be facing Stone Cold Steve Austin, with whom he had been feuding for months, in an I Quit match. I knew it would be good, but those guys definitely exceeded expectations, as the match was a work of art. By the end of it, Hart was a villain, while Rowdy Heel Austin was on the verge of becoming WWF's next great hero. As with Murdoch, DiBiase, and Mid-South, pulling off a double turn was delicate work, but they did it to perfection. Austin was close to being cheered anyway, and because of Bret's ever-increasing popularity in Canada, some American fans started seeing him as much as more of an outsider. I love my country, but Americans can be strange stuck sometimes in how they and view nationalism. When Bret did an interview somewhere praising Canada, even though he didn't say a bad word about the United States, some American fans took it as, "He's not from the USA! Well, screw him!" WrestleMania 13 was the match that made Austin, with Bret Hart basically welcoming Austin into the main event club. Bret's on-screen turn led to the formation of the Hart Foundation. Bret Hart, Owen Hart, Jim the Anvil Neidhart, Davey Boy Smith, and Brian Pillman. It was one hell of a unit. Not only were they a talented crew, but they played up being an anti-American, pro-Canadian faction, which created an interesting dynamic. They'd be villains in the States, heroes in Canada and Europe, with Austin and other heroes and our other heroes in the opposite roles. The group peaked in July 1997 as the Canadian Stampede pay-per-view held in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, where Brett and Owen's dad, Stu Hart, had run the local territory for decades. The show was a homecoming for the Hart Foundation, and it was an emotionally charged night as I had experienced in wrestling. The main event was a 10-man tag match, pitting the 5 members Hart Foundation against Steve Austin, Ken Shamrock, Goldust, and the Legion of Doom. Austin's team, who would have been huge fan favorites in the States, damn near got booed out of the building. The hometown Hart team got a reaction that got louder and louder as each member was introduced individually. Finally, when Bret Hart came out, the 12,000 fans in attendance gave a loud a cheer as I've ever heard from a wrestling crowd of any size. Despite great nights like that one, things were getting ugly between Bret and Shawn backstage. Shawn had returned to duty in June after taking a few months to decompress, but he and Bret had developed friction that was only getting worse. It was sad to watch two former best friends continue to slide into a deep, personal feud with each other. Soon after, the two even had a locker room scuffle, which led to Shawn storming out of the building in New Haven. The fight was inevitable, I guess. A flood of emotions finally overtook them both. Poor Pat Patterson got caught in the middle, literally. He was in the locker room, talk about wrong place at the wrong time, and they almost suffocated him by trying to get at each other. It wasn't a long fight. They fell through a flimsy wall, where Jerry Lawler was using the bathroom. My main focus had to be on getting everyone else on the roster calmed down, refocused on getting that night's Raw done, and getting back to work. In August 1997, an accident during the SummerSlam pay-per-view put our hottest new star on the shelf and made for a scary moment for me, personally. In a match against Owen Hart, Steve Austin suffered a neck injury when Owen misjudged his placement of Austin on a pile driver, and Austin's entire body weight came down on his neck. He lay there after the match, unable to move, and had to have help getting from the ring. I was more worried about my friend than any effect of Austin's absence on the business, but I tried to stay focused as we still had a show to call. Backstage, producers did, thankfully, keep us posted on Austin, and before the night was out, I was relieved to hear he'd already regained some feeling in his limbs. Although I'm sure he didn't feel this way at the time. Steve was lucky that the injury wasn't crippling as spinal injuries could be. Weeks later, when Steve came out of surgery in San Antonio, he woke up in his hospital room to find me sitting at the foot of his bed. I wanted to be there for him, and I also wanted to represent Vince and the company. Owen Hart felt awful about it and didn't know quite how to handle something that was unprecedented for someone as careful and skilled as Owen. He asked me frequently how Steve was doing, but he was hesitant to call because he was embarrassed and felt horrible about it and just didn't know what to say. Steve's absence put the spotlight back on Shawn and Bret. I was aware of Bret's contract talks and that he had an amazing offer from WCW on the table. Scott Hall and Kevin Nash were encouraging him to come, in part because their WCW contracts had clauses known as most favored nations, which meant that their salaries rose with the hiring of any new signee, making more than their current rates. WWF couldn't afford the 7-figure annual salary WWE was dangling, so even though I know with certainty that Bret didn't want to leave, the financial security was more than he could ultimately reject. Whatever happened to end the contract negotiations between Bret and WWF, I was made aware that we weren't going to be able to keep him. At that point, the company's issues became how to get the WWF's world title off of a guy who was now bound for the competition. That was also the point at which I was no longer involved in the situation. Once Bret's leaving was inevitable, it ceased to be something I could help manage, via talent relations. Figuring out how best to get the title off of Bret was for creative to decide, and I was not part of that process. For a while I thought Bret would drop the belt as the non-televised event in Detroit. I thought that would have been a great idea to show fans that anything could happen. Then the next champ could do a non-finish with Brett at Survivor Series, and that would be that. Vince ultimately decided to do it on the pay-per-view so the fans could see the title change, which I can understand. Going into Survivor Series, Lawler and I had decided between us that the less we knew, the better off we'd be, as was our general policy. Before we walked out, Jerry Briscoe asked if I knew what we were doing that night. I said no, last I heard it was going to be a DQ, but I don't even know who's getting DQ'd. He didn't offer any more, which suited me perfectly. I like to call the matches as I saw them. Too much info on what was about to happen usually killed the realness of the call. What Lawler and I did know was that Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels were two of the best in the world, and their pride wouldn't let them give anything less than a stellar match. Ready, JR? Lawler asked. Always, King, I replied. I could feel the energy in the building as we sat in our commentary positions at ringside. The building was hot, and we both knew we were in for a memorable night. Shawn and Bret had a good match, with the Canadian Pro Bret crowd getting more rabid as the contest went on. I glanced up from the monitor embedded in our announce table and noticed Vince was at ringside, along with a couple of the agents. I didn't see them come out because I was watching the TV feed of the match, not the ring, so that my called match what the audience was at home was seeing. I just presumed Vince was positioning himself to be part of the finish, causing the DQ. In the ring, Shawn got Bret in Bret's own sharpshooter finishing move, which also wasn't unusual as heels had used the Neo's own finishers on them for ages. But then suddenly, without Bret submitting, referee Earl Hebner made a sign that Bret had submitted and the bell rang. I looked over to the timekeeper Mark Yeaton because I thought he had rung the bell by mistake. I thought, bad time to make a mistake like that with the boss down at ringside. But Vince didn't react. It was in that split second I knew something was up. The match was over, and Shawn's music began playing. I said to the audience at home, "What happened? What happened? Bret Hart submitted to the sharpshooter?" Shawn was declared the winner and new champion. Bret looked utterly confused, and then utterly furious. Lawler and I looked at each other like, what the hell just happened? Down through my headset, I was given the call from backstage to get off air. With Shawn's music still playing, I simply said, "Ladies and gentlemen from Montreal, good night," before we went to black. The fans began to throw stuff at the ringside area. Bret was irate. Vince was still there, and he and Bret were eyeballing each other. Bret from the ring spat right in McMahon's face. Vince barely reacted at all, except to wipe the spit from his face. Lawler tapped me on the arm and gave me the signal to move. Both he and I made our way backstage as something bad was brewing for real at ringside. When Lawler and I reached the back, referee Earl Hebner was gone, Shawn was gone, and Jerry Briscoe was gone. Lawler looked at me and said, "Did you know that was going to happen?" "No, no idea," I said. Vince reappeared backstage and immediately walked toward me. "JR, I want you to go to my office and lock yourself in." "What?" "Listen to me. This could get bad. Move. Now!" Vince motioned for a security guard to bring me to his office. Bret was still in the ring, and the Hart Foundation had joined him. Vince was staying put. I was shown to Vince's office, where I began to process a significant amount of information. The noises I began to hear were disturbing, as was the eventual sound of silence. There was shouting, arguing, tension, and then nothing. I wanted to see what was going on, but knew Vince wasn't messing around when he told me to stay put. After a while, I heard some familiar voices approaching the door. Jerry Briscoe and Shane McMahon helped Vince in through the door. The boss was groggy, and there was a noticeable mark on his face. Neither man said anything for a minute or two, until Vince looked up from the ground. His stare belonged to a man whose mind was elsewhere. "I had to give Bret a free shot. I owed him that much," Vince said, to no one in particular. He then looked directly at me. "I didn't want you to know. I know. It was important that you were left out so you could continue to work with the talent activists, Vince continued. If I had clued you in, you'd never have their trust again. I understand. I knew what Vince was trying to do and protected my position in the company. I also knew that the boys were mostly going to believe what they wanted to believe. I cautiously left Vince's office, and the first person I saw was Undertaker. His opinion and read on the situation was important, as he was widely seen as the voice of authority among the wrestlers. You don't worry, he said before I even opened my mouth. I got your back. As I walked out of the building, I tried to address the concerns and apprehensions of the talent. I knew a lot of folks in the Hart camp, his friends and family, believed that because of my role in the talent relations, I had to know. Some of the guys believed me, but I also knew others didn't. All I could do was deal with the talent as I had before the incident in the ring, with respect and honesty. As I got back to the hotel, the fans were catcalling and booing us as we walked in. I spent most of that night fielding calls from concerned wrestlers. Mick Foley was particularly sickened by how WWF treated Brett, but most had decided by the end of the night that this wasn't their hill to die on. Brett was leaving and getting well paid to do so. Even if the boys disagreed with what had happened, they knew they had their own families to feed and their own careers to look after. The personal hurt and division in Montreal created a small but noticeable business opportunity. In TV terms, it created the best heel of that generation, Mr. McMahon. There we go. Chapter 60. A Little More Attitude. 1998 to 99. From conflict came an opening. Vince, being the ultimate showman, saw the negative response he was getting after Montreal and said, You don't like me? You don't like the way I operate this company? Well, I'll give you something to truly hate. And he reinvented himself as the top villain in the genre at age 52. Vince told me, hold on, it's been a little too loud. Where's my remote? It's been a little too loud over here with this. Where is my remote? I should have swore I put my remote over here. Yeah, I don't think it's over there anywhere. Ah, here it is. It's going to be loud for me. Vince told me, you know, JR, there's a difference between Mr. McMahon on TV and Vince McMahon in real life. Really? I said. And what might that be? He struggled to answer. And that was the key. Mr. McMahon was an over-the-top version of Vince who would come to the surface in real life if someone did something really stupid or ill-advised. Of course, Vince's aggressive nature was nothing that fazed me. I had learned from Bill Watts, who, during phone conferences, would lift out of his chair and attack the speakerphone because he couldn't get his hands on whoever was on the other end. I had also learned from my dad, who hit a cow with an uppercut because the cow kicked him. He wasn't looking to abuse the animal. It was completely reactionary. Watts was the same. Vince was the same. Reactionary. I chose not to analyze or judge. Seeing alpha males flip that switch was nothing new to me. I could handle it, live with it, and actually thrive around it to reach my payback at the end of the month. Of course, the version of Vince that was catching people's attention on TV was an insanely exaggerated version of who he was, mixed with a natural ability to be a great heel performer. He was so good at it that he had the fans fooled. People really wanted to know how I could work with someone so evil. And the perfect foil for the character of the overbearing boss was the working man who refused to be anything but true to himself. And that's where Stone Cold Steve Austin came in. And Bret Hart was the guy who brought Austin onto the main event mountain. McMahon was the guy who helped Austin build a mansion at the peak. It fit Austin to a T for him to be the defiant anti-establishment guy. Austin and McMahon, backed up by a cast of hungry, talented, and rejuvenated superstars, were causing the ratings needle to move back in our direction. It was a needle that I wasn't really paying much attention to. I didn't have time to worry when we were losing the ratings battle. I didn't have time to celebrate when we started standing back up the mountain again. My focus and obsession was putting together the best roster in the history of the game and giving everything I had at the announcer's table. I sat ringside to witness Austin win the championship from Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 14. Their storyline had spanned months and included boxing legend Mike Tyson as a ringside enforcer and backup referee in Shawn Michaels' corner. When Tyson counted 3, the 19,000 fans in Boston's Fleet Center erupted as I passionately called on commentary. Austin is the champion! Stone Cold! Stone Cold! Stone Cold! The Austin era has begun! I tried to do it as good as he did, but it was okay. Yeah. And for all the controversy Shawn Michaels seemed to generate, I saw him give a truly gutsy performance. He was already working through the everyday pain of his high-impact wrestling style when he suffered a severe back injury at the Royal Rumble show just a couple of months before. Shawn was not a giant, and the volume of huge bumps he took in delivering all those great performances over the years were finally catching up with him. He had to heal, and when that door shut, the Austin door opened. And Mike Tyson's role in that, the whole deal was invaluable too. Tyson first attended the WWF show on air at the 1998 Royal Rumble, and the next night his Mania role was announced. Tyson was there for the announcement, but Austin came out to the ring, and the face-off between them was a pivotal moment. It blew up around us to become one of the first ESPN SportsCenter moments that we ever had. Tyson was another controversial figure, but he was an absolute pleasure to work with. He'd been a major wrestling fan since childhood. He grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and followed his WWF heroes faithfully. He could talk for hours about Bruno Sammartino or Chief Jay Strongbow, and he had a picture-perfect recall of matches and events. He was always a professional, on time, ready to go, and willing to do whatever he was asked to help the promotion succeed. He truly got it because he had been a long-time fan. The next night, Raw kicked off the Austin McMahon feud that had been brewing for weeks. A week after that, as the feud intensified, WWF did something it had not done in more than 18 months. Raw beat WCW's Nitro in the ratings. Nitro had made such a big splash that WCW won the ratings battle for 83 straight weeks. Tuesday morning after the Raw that broke the streak, there was some celebrating, but not by me. After each night's Raw, I'd oftentimes go back to my hotel room and watch that night's replay of Nitro, and I always thought, why are we losing to this? I didn't like us getting beaten 83 weeks in a row, but I wasn't going to dwell on it because my thoughts was, we have a chance to play another game on Monday. With all the duties I was handling, I didn't have time to breathe. I was busy doing the payroll for the 100 plus members of talent and playing the role of priest, guidance counselor, 12-step sponsor, and school principal as needed. I could feel the momentum turn in our favor. I was happy with that. Right after Mania 14, we also debuted Sean Waltman, who made his name previously in WWF as the 1-2-3 Kid, but was now reintroduced as X-Pac, the newest member of DX. That was significant because it was the first high-profile NWO member to defect to WWF. While some people were looking to come back to WWF, Others were looking to work there for the first time. After that, Steve Williams had made it as a major star in Japan, but after a decade of doing most of his wrestling there, Doc was looking to spend more time in the States. Another factor that he regrettably was not as forthcoming about was his body was carrying the effects of years of wrestling his intensely physical style, especially in Japan. Doc still looked like a tank, but he was only human, like the rest of us. Although I didn't know quite Even though I didn't quite know how worn down his body was, I did know he was a 16-year veteran with a style no one would mistake for easy. Doc reminded me of Vader, where we thought him a little too late to really get the most out of him. I was hoping to get one good run out of Doc, which would not only help the company, but also get him a nice payday. And then came the Brawl for All. When I got the word from creative, I detested it immediately. I understood that the fans might wonder who would really win a fight in a fight against wrestler A and B, but for us to try it was plain stupid. It immediately created dissection in the locker room as guys took sides with each new matchup, not to mention that it caused injuries that cost the company a lot of money in medical bills and lost revenue, and it did not benefit any of the participants. Even the winner ultimately lost out as a result of participating. Doc was one of the 16 entrants, and with his credentials as a 4-time wrestling All-American at the University of Oklahoma, he was one of the favorites to win it all. In the second round bout with Bart Gunn, he tore his quad during the third round of the fight. The muscles came off the bone and rolled up his leg. I had no idea how Doc was even standing after that, but he wouldn't quit. So he got the shit beaten out of him pretty quickly by Bart, a tough man in his own right. Doc was literally a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. He was never the same after that, and because he was seen as JR's boy, because we were both from Oklahoma, both came up through Mid-South, and we were friends outside of the business, some people began spreading the BS that I now somehow had it in for Bart Gunn, which was 100% untrue. It probably didn't help that Doc told people in the locker room that he had already been paid the winner's cash prize. I began to hear that I was so mad at Bart Gunn for beating Doc that I personally went out and booked Butterbean to fight Gunn at WrestleMania 15. Butterbean was Eric Esch, a super heavyweight boxer who had come from the world of tough man contests, mixed martial arts, K1, and Pride. Even though Bean had more than 150 pounds on Bart, the idea was for both men to battle in one last shoot boxing match for the company. Not only was this not my idea, but if I'd been asked, I would have objected strongly. Nothing against Butterbean, he was really a nice guy, but I didn't understand why we were taking the only guy who had gotten anything positive from that stupid tournament and risking what little momentum he had. Butterbean came to me before the fight, the day of Mania, and asked me, "Hey, are you guys gonna be mad at me if I knock Bart out in the first round?" He was concerned about it because he was considering getting into wrestling and didn't want to burn a bridge. "Well, this is supposed to be real, Bean, so do what you gotta do. No one's gonna be mad at you," I said. Privately, I was thinking, don't underestimate Bart Gunn. There's a lot of people in that locker room who think Bart's gonna knock the barbecue out of Butterbean. Bart was in great shape, had that devastating left hand, and had a reach advantage, and had gone through the guys in Brawl for All like salt through a widowed woman, as my granddad used to say. A lot of the guys in the locker room were actually taking bets, and more of them were looking to bet on Bart rather than the experienced Butterbean. It only took Butterbean 35 seconds to cost a lot of the locker room a decent amount of cash, because he quickly and conclusively knocked out Bart. It wasn't a fluke. There was no lucky punch. As dangerous and powerful as Bart was, he was up against a guy who legitimately beat people up for a living. Bart was out of the company not long after, as was Doc, so with Brawl for All, we ended up creating 0 stars, racking up thousands of medical bills, and even finding a way to make the winner look like a loser. It broke my heart to have to let Doc go, especially since it strained the friendship we've built for nearly 20 years, as I knew it would. I understood why he was mad. Doc felt like he had never gotten a real chance in the company, but I also understood the company's perspective. It always sucked to let someone go, but it was worse when it was a friend. The whole Brawl for All competition was an utter failure, but it was also the actions of the company who was willing to push the envelope to keep the ratings moving in their favor. WWF versus WCW was a very real war with very real consequences for the eventual loser. Our locker room looked at it like they were fighting for their livelihoods. As a result, our shows became more brash, the characters more bold, and the storylines more edgy and far riskier. Jeez, the fact that's all was still going on for most of that chapter is kind of surprising to me. Chapter 61, Hell in a Cell, June 1998. But I gotta do this without the music, because I love what he says here. Good God Almighty! Good God Almighty! They've killed him! As God is my witness, he is broken in half! It was only a few minutes into the match, and I genuinely thought my friend was dead or dying. Mick Foley wanted to top Shawn Michaels' performance in the previous Hell in a Cell match, and the way he chose to do it was by climbing to the top of the cell structure and covered the ring and goaded his opponent, The Undertaker, into following him up there. Undertaker made his famous entrance and duly joined Mick 20 feet above the arena floor. The weight of both men immediately put the structure itself to the test as their collective 600 pounds tore the wire mesh under their feet as they walked. I was positioned at the edge of the cell on the floor and watched my monitor as both men battled over to the side where Jerry Lawler and I were sitting. Beside us was the Spanish announce team led by Hugo Savinovich. On top of the call, Mick and Taker threw punches and went back and forth at the very edge to make the audience think something bad was going to happen. And then it did. Undertaker threw Foley from the top of the cell. Mick fell 20 feet through the Spanish announce team's table at ringside. His 300-plus pound body exploded the table as his body slid limply under the guardrail. From my vantage point, Mick Foley had disappeared under the collapsed table, and I had no idea what shape he was in. Good God Almighty! Good God Almighty! They've killed him! As God is my witness, he is broken in half! I shouted. My words were real. My worry for Mick was real. My shock was real. Lawler, also stunned, was muttering, "Oh my God, oh my God." I turned my attention from the audience at home to the people in the back. Somebody get out here! Really, I mean it! As the monitor filled with replays of the fall shot from different angles, I still couldn't believe what I had just seen. All I could mutter was, Look at that, folks." Seconds went by and Foley was still lying there, and I could feel the anger rising in me. "We need doctors out here. If somebody could get off their butt in the back and get somebody out here." But Lawler and I weren't the only ones worried about him. Even though they had recently been feuding on television, Terry Funk left that behind to come check on the man who he'd fought and mentored across the globe. Lawler was calling for help with the Spanish announce crew, who had been in the path of the plummeting 300-pounder. Jerry noted that mankind was starting to stir as medical help finally got to Mick in the form of a doctor, some officials, and a team of paramedics carrying a stretcher. Even Vince McMahon set aside his evil on-air persona to see if Mick Foley was okay. Mick didn't appear to be cooperating, and Terry Funk looked almost tearful as he implored Mick Foley to get on the stretcher. I thought Mick's career was over, maybe even worse. He was alive. He was breathing. But everyone around him felt he was in bad shape. They wheeled him slowly from ringside, with the Undertaker still looking down from on top of the cell. Apparently, as quick and unusually as this match started, it has ended, I said. But Mick didn't get that memo. The paramedics didn't get too far with the hardcore legend before he fought his way off the gurney, made it back to the cage, where once more, against all logic, he then climbed to the top of the cell. As big as Mick was, it wasn't easy for him to stay on that fence the first time, much less after the damage he had absorbed, but he made it. The fall from the top of the cage onto the ringside table was something Foley and Taker had worked on, but the next stunt wasn't in anyone's plans. Undertaker was to chokeslam Foley on top of the cage, and Foley would sell it as Undertaker climbed down and into the ring. Instead, when Foley's body hit the cell, a part of it gave way and it swung open like a steel trapdoor, leaving Foley to fall all the way to the mat, back first. Even worse, the chair he tossed on top of the cage earlier was right behind him and ended up smashing him in the face as he landed. This time, even Undertaker seemed shocked as he looked down at Foley. The doctor, referees, and medics rushed into the ring as well as said, "That's it, he's dead." The King, known for his sharp humor, wasn't kidding. Somehow, that impact had knocked out one of Mick's teeth, which lodged itself in his left nostril, as a gruesome camera close-up would show a few minutes later. The whole performance was scary, and I was doubly convinced the match was over. I was sure Vince was going to come back out and announce that it was, and I don't think one fan would have been upset that it ended right then. I even screamed, "Would somebody stop the damn match? Enough is enough!" But even after being out cold for a minute or so, Mick was apparently looking to finish the match. The Undertaker climbed down into the ring through the opening Mick's second nasty fall had created. Funk was being the old pro that he was, taking a couple of shots from Taker to buy Mick a few more seconds of recovery time. Finally, they all cleared out, and after a short brawl, Mick pulled out a bag of thumbtacks and dumped them all over the mat. Of course, the villainous Mankind's plan was foiled. Mick slammed Mankind onto the thumbtacks before finally ending it with a signature tombstone piledriver. Everyone took a huge sigh of relief when the bell rang to signal the end. I was one of Mick's biggest advocates in this company, but as I sat there, I couldn't help but think Mick went way too far in that match. I admired his guts and toughness, but he never needed to get even close to that level of danger. After he got to the back, Vince thanked him for putting himself out there to make the show, but then added, "Don't ever do anything like that again." I had a similar conversation with Mick a couple of days later, in my role as head of talent. "You're never going to be around here to make the money that's there for you," I said. "You're too entertaining and too skilled not to figure this shit out. You don't have to be a Cactus Jack, splattering yourself on the concrete." Mick listened to me and Vince, but I had a feeling as I shook his hand, there was still that wild look in his eye. That need to give the fans what he thought they wanted from him. His body. Chapter 62. Second Attack. December 1998. "I'm sorry, honey, but your mother has passed away," my wife said over the phone. I was in England for the Capital Carnage show, a British-only pay-per-view. My mother had dealt with heart issues her entire life, and she had succumbed to a heart attack at 64 years of age. I sat in my room, tears in my eyes, remembering how she had become a big wrestling fan who never missed Raw. I thought about the work ethic she and Dad had instilled in me growing up. Vince offered to fly me home as quickly as he could and make that happen. I'm going to stay, I said. I'm going to stay and do my job. Do you want me to fly Jan here to London so she can be with you? He asked. No, thank you. Vince and Linda couldn't have been nicer or more supportive, but I wanted to do my work the way I had always done my work, without Jan doting on me. I wanted to grieve in my own way, do my job, and get through it. That's the man my mother raised. Someone who would see the job through. The next night, Lawler and I was calling the first hour of the show when I began to feel some strange sensations. I suddenly had a throbbing headache and the audio coming through my headphones got painfully loud. Every noise felt like it was killing me. My eye wouldn't blink, my tongue went numb, and I began to have trouble enunciating as I lost control of the muscles on the left side of my face. We were live and I had to support my cheek with my hand just to keep talking. I was pretty sure it was another Bell's palsy attack, even though it was a different experience than the first one. This was much more intense. As the night wore on, I was hoping it would be Bell's palsy, when the alternative might have been a stroke. I began to think that maybe I triggered the attack by putting myself under the stress of suppressing my grief, not dealing with my feelings of sadness, instead focusing on preparing for a live broadcast. Lawler noticed right away that something was wrong, but I wanted to keep going. I wanted to finish the job I had started. It was important to me as a tribute to my mother and the son she raised. After the show, I went straight back to the hotel and packed. I knew I had to fly back and see a neurologist. I knew I had to fly back and bury my mother. When I landed, I was told that Vince got me an appointment to see a highly regarded neurologist in Connecticut. That visit confirmed that it was Bell's palsy and that they still hadn't figured out what caused it, or how to cure it, during the 5 years between my first attack and this one. I was prescribed prednisone and told to stay away from loud noises and certain tones that might trigger the headaches. I was also carrying around artificial tears to moisten my eye when needed. That night, I had to tape my left eye shut as I slept. I wasn't home for long before I felt depression setting in. First, it hit me that I was basically all that was left of my family. No brothers or sisters, and my parents and grandparents were all gone. My daughters were attending school in Oklahoma, but my relationships with them were not as good as I'd have liked them to be. As I made arrangements for my mother, I knew the disconnect with my daughter was 100% my fault. I focused so much on my job and all the travel that I thought if I could do over again, this would be the only thing I'd change. As the years went by, I moved from Dallas to Atlanta, and then to Connecticut. I was going farther and farther from Oklahoma, while they were young women in grade school, high school, and later college. I was sure they knew I loved them, but I wished we could have had a more traditional relationship. Knowing my mother was now gone left me feeling alone. I loved her and cared for her. Listened to her talk about how much she loved watching me on the TV. She was kind and loved me without any conditions. She was only just gone, and I already missed her terribly. I could feel myself slipping further. I was grieving, ashamed of how I looked, and coming to terms with the distinct possibility that my on-screen career was over. Appearance was important in wrestling. It always had been. Appearance was important in wrestling. It always had been. I wasn't sure that WWF wanted a guy who looked like I now looked wrestling, welcoming a worldwide audience to their product, especially now that half my face was literally sagging. I knew that in wrestling, when any promoter saw a weakness, his impulse was to remove it immediately. That wasn't just a Vince McMahon thing. It was an every smart booker in wrestling history thing. The more I thought about it, the more I thought I'd have to shift course and focus on talent relations or help produce my replacement on air. Announcing was the thing I loved most, because when they played my boomer sooner music and I started down that aisle, every problem I had evaporated. It released the joy in me, a way of forgetting everything else except the story in front of me. I couldn't create the feeling a live audience gave me in any other part of my life, but it now seemed like after 24 years of doing it, and through no fault of my own, I would never broadcast again. Everything else in my life was crumbling, except Jan. She minded me, tried to make me feel better. She watched my physical health tumble and my mental health follow, but she never judged, rushed, or wanted anything from me. She would go by Titan Towers and pick up my memos, payroll information, and everything I needed to work from home. I knew that the more I didn't have to leave the house, the worse it would be for me in the long run. But I just didn't want to go out. I didn't want people to see me and how I looked. Working from home sounded great, but for me, I was letting my home become my personal comfort zone. I didn't want to go to the office. I didn't go to the grocery store. I didn't want to go out to eat. I didn't want to do anything but hide. And then Vince sent me a letter. He had somebody from the office hand deliver it to me. It read, Dear JR, it's not the number of times you get knocked down in life that counts. What counts is the number of times you get the fuck back up. So get the fuck back up. Give the stone cold hand sign to everyone who wants you to stay down. Use the love, respect, admiration, strength, and will of your friends and family to bolster your spirit, restore your confidence, and help you face the challenge of the future. You have come a long way, JR. You've earned a great deal of respect and admiration from family, friends, and foes. However, that was yesterday. I need you. Your family needs you. Your company needs you to help carry the WWF into the future, black hat and all. JR, you have my utmost respect, appreciation, and love. Your friend, Vince. P.S. There are 5,000 reasons for you to celebrate this Christmas in an envelope on my desk, which will be presented to you on your first day back at the office. Merry Christmas. Hold up. After a few weeks of keeping myself in seclusion, I finally resolved that I could be making myself more useful. I still felt down. I still felt hurt. I still felt brittle. But in January, I reported back to work after only a few weeks away. Vince was waiting with his arms outstretched. God damn it, pal. Welcome back, he said. I didn't really want to look him in the eye because of how my face was. I didn't want him to see weakness. I didn't want him looking at me and thinking I couldn't do a job for his company. Thank you, I said. What for? He asked. Getting me out of the house. In addition to my existing administrative duties, I started helping to produce the announcing on Raw each Monday. I could feel the energy from the crowd through the curtain, but I didn't want to go out there. I was afraid of being mocked. That curtain became my safety net. I could stay on one side of it and try to make myself forget that I looked the way I did. If I walked the other side, the whole world would see. Even the thought of going out there before the people made my stomach turn. But out I went, and we tried an angle where I was a heel and Dr. Death was going to be my muscle. It didn't click, and it made me feel worse. I wasn't ready, and the people didn't know how to take me being the bad guy. They quickly scrapped it, and I hit backstage again. Michael Cole was my replacement, and even though he was newish and green, I could tell that he was going to be a hell of a talent in that position. In my mind, I was finished with the announcer section of my career. I had no idea that the two biggest stars in the company were already talking to Vince about getting me back out there. Chapter 63. Chapter 63. Coming home. Hey pal, make sure you bring your tux to Philly, Vince said the week before WrestleMania 15, featuring Stone Cold Steve Austin and Rocky Maivia, now a main evented as The Rock. I know exactly how we're gonna end this bit here. Even if it gets me a copyright claim, I don't give a shit. What for? I asked. I always wore a coat and tie because I was a senior company official and wanted to look professional. The tux, though, was an unusual request for off-air talent. Because I'm gonna put you back to work, Vince said. Doing what? I wearily asked. You're gonna call the main event at Mania, he said with a smile. You're ready. Vince patted me on the shoulder and walked away. I was thrilled to hear that he had the confidence to put me out there with that match because we all knew what we had with Austin and what we were going to have with The Rock. So this main event was huge for the company. But his words also sent a cold chill down my spine. I quickly found out that Austin and Rock personally requested that I be out there. Both men and Vince wanted me to be the soundtrack to the biggest match of their lives. It was a gesture that elevated me and petrified me at the same time. I was still avoiding the world, walking with my head down, not going out unless I had to. I came to work and did my best, but left as soon as I could, just in case someone outside the car backstage team saw me. I wanted to call the matches again and made that known, but 10 minutes later, I was hunched over with shame. Shame I didn't bring on, but shame nonetheless. I was also conflicted. I was itching to get back out, but petrified that they'd ask me to do just that. I knew I was the same old JR that that our audience had come to know, and I knew I wasn't him still either. The night before the show, I couldn't sleep. I was worried about everything under the sun. How would I sound on the show? Wouldn't I be able to figure this out? Would I still have my timing? What would the crowd do when they saw me again? I can't do this, I whispered to myself. I have to quit. I was like the Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz, missing my heart, wishing I could get it back. I shuffled out of bed and sat chain-smoking cigarettes and popping Xanax to help settle myself. Neither worked. Are you sure you want to do this? Jan asked. No, I replied. When we arrived at the Fleet Union Center in Philadelphia, I sat outside for a few minutes planning my getaway. The speech I had conjured up in my mind was pretty convincing. I was sure that I could leave and make a pretty good case as to why I'd disappeared. But I walked forward, even though every fiber of me wanted to backpedal. At every arena, WWF set up various rooms which are designated for various things, including Vince's office, Diva's locker room, male locker room, and a talent relations room. I spent a lot of time in the talent relations room that day, just trying to stay away from everybody. It took me an hour just to put my tux on, because I kept stopping and thinking, Maybe I should go tell Vince I couldn't do this now. I cried. I lost focus. I got sick. I didn't want to be court-martialed. I just wanted my honorable discharge. I looked I looked I looked myself in the mirror to straighten my bow tie, and my reflection started to startle me a little. Not because of what I looked like now, but because of who I looked like. My reflection, my hat, my eyes reminded me of my dad. As I stood there, my head started to fill with thoughts of him and his legacy, the way he had raised his only son, and my mom, how she had been a huge fan of my calls, my passionate on air. Quitting would be an insult to their memory. I knew if I turned down this match that I'd be quitting what I loved, for good. Professionally, if I wasn't up for calling the main event of WrestleMania, then I'd never be called up for calling it, never be up for calling anything. I thought of Austin and Rock and how they always wanted this match to be the best it could be, and in their view, having me out there was what was the way to do that. This was a match that had been building for a year, and they trusted me with it. My confidence began to rise slowly, and I started thinking, this is not who you are. This is not how you were raised. This is not the attitude that got you this far. You're not at the Irish McNeil's Boys Club in Shreveport. You're not at the TBS studios in Atlanta. You're at Wrestle fucking Mania. Grow a pair, get your ass out there, and do what you were born to do. I'd finally gotten myself to the point where I'd managed to piss myself off, but it was beginning to work. If this was to be my last time out there, I wanted to go out on the biggest stage of them all, calling the biggest match of them all. I washed my face and loaded my eyes with Vicine, because I didn't want people to know I'd been crying, or think I'd been smoking a joint. I left the safety of my office and walked with purpose. My legs were braver than my mind, but I was going to do this. Courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway, I thought over and over. People passed with greetings of good luck, JR, and welcome back, JR. Ready or not, it was time to saddle up. Rock and Austin were doing the same in their own way as they waited for their cue. My beloved University of Oklahoma fight song, Boomer Sooner, began playing throughout the sound system in the arena to usher me out through the curtain. It was now or never. Please go easy on me, I thought as I took a deep breath and cracked open the curtain. I could feel the energy from the crowd as it immediately raised my confidence a little. Don't worry if they boo you, a stagehand said from the darkness. I stopped immediately. What? What? You think they'll boo me? Maybe, he said. This is the city that booed Santa Claus after all. Have fun out there. I peeked out through the curtain at the raucous crowd in the arena. Well, fuck, I whispered to myself as I walked out to face the world again. As I walked down that aisle, the raucous Philadelphia fans gave me a standing ovation. Not that one. As I walked the raucous Philadelphia fans gave me a standing ovation. I tipped my hat to Michael Cole as I walked past him on the way to the announce table. Folks reached out for me to high-five them, and the whole arena was cheering. They didn't care how I looked. They were just happy to see me. And boy, was I happy to see them too. I sat down at the announce table next to my partner, Jerry Lawler, and put my headphones on, just as he was saying that we couldn't have WrestleMania without good old JR. I said, well, King, I can't describe how it feels. The truth was I was afraid to describe how it felt because I didn't want to get emotional on air. 25 years of learning, making mistakes, and meeting my heroes, understanding my deep flaws, being on top of the world, avoiding trouble, being truly down, laughing, moving, driving, paying my dues, leaving the farm, missing my folks, loving my wife, failing my daughters, taking risks, and calling the matches with everything that I had, all led to this. And it had just about got too much to hold back. As I walked into the building that night, I thought this was going to be my last match. But as I walked out happy, relieved, and truly at home, I knew it wasn't. Afterward, by Stone Cold Steve Austin. I've been a fan of professional wrestling my entire life. As a young boy, the action in the ring, the psychology, and the storylines left an indelible impression on me as I grew up in Edna, Texas. So many memories, so many sights, but also so many sounds. I grew up I grew up hearing great announcers, but it wasn't until I discovered Bill Watts' Mid-South Wrestling that I heard the greatest. Jim Ross's voice was full of energy, enthusiasm, reasoning, understanding, and passion from day one. When he moved to the NWA, I got to move right there with him. It was an honor to have him call some of my matches. I knew that through his unquestioned credibility that Jim could make a bad match better, and a great match into damn near a religious experience. A few years after Jim left for the holy grail of sports entertainment, the WWF, I wound up there too. JR may have had something to do with that because he always believed in the potential of an athletic and aggressive prospect from Victoria, Texas. Soon thereafter, the Monday Night Wars began, and good old JR was the voice that captured all the triumph, rage, excitement, and heartbreak of that Attitude Era. From a personal standpoint, I truly appreciate how Jim was able to seamlessly understand and explain the Stone Cold character to the world. Simply put, Jim Ross's words made people better, and he didn't just do it for me. He did it for the entire locker room. I know that along his journey, JR has suffered many personal setbacks. He was fired a time or two, which I'm sure you've read about in this book. He also comes from a tough background, and I believe it is that tough background that made him into the man he is today. He is, in my opinion, the greatest announcer to ever call a match. But more than that, he's my friend. He gave me support, advice, guidance, and was always there when I needed someone. Stay tuned, folks. Business is about to pick up. Acknowledgements. JR. My late wife, Jan, who was my biggest fan and the most positive voice in my life. My mom and dad, JD and Elizabeth Ann Ross, for allowing me to dream big. My wonderful daughters, Cassie and Amanda, for enduring my crazy schedule and, at times, my unhealthy obsession for my work. Thanks for always persevering and for always loving your dad. Leroy McGirt and Cowboy Bill Watts for providing me my first job opportunity in pro wrestling business in 1974 and for being compelling mentors to a wide-eyed country boy who loved wrestling. Vince McMahon for hiring me in WWE in 1993 and for providing me the opportunity to grow as a professional and as a man. Your work ethic and passion for the genre, along with your vision and leadership, is unsurpassed. Kevin Dunn, my executive producer at WWE during my tenure there, my fellow Oklahoma Sooners football fanatic, and who was instrumental for helping bring me home to WWE in 2017. Barry Bloom, my manager and trusted friend, who had strategically guided my career to new levels after a not-so-great start to our relationship. All the men and women in the sports entertainment world, especially all the in-ring talents who I have worked with for 40-plus years. My many broadcast partners over the years, including Michael Hayes, Bob Caudle, Tony Schiavone, Jim Cornette, Les Thatcher, the great Gordon Sully, Terry Funk, Magnum TA, Missy Hyatt, Bobby Heenan, Gorilla Monsoon, Vince McMahon, Jerry Lawler, Paul Heyman, Taz, Mick Foley, and Josh Barnett. Scott Williams left us too soon in 2016 while working on this book, but Drew's contributions were invaluable. Simply getting to know Scott when he would come to Norman from Houston to do research on our project was a blessing. I never met a bigger wrestling fan. Paul O'Brien has been the best writing partner a person could ever want. Paul's talents and sensibilities are God's gift, and my Irish friend heard my voice and captured it magnificently. To my friends Jacob Ullman, Andrew Simon, Adam Swift, the late Daryl Ewalt, Dennis Brent, Russ Mayerson, Wallace Marsh, Barry Werner, and countless others who have befriended me over the years and who will serve as an inspiration as to what being a true friend means. My friend Bob Stoops, or simply Bobby to me, who facilitated many of my most cherished memories during his 18-plus year tenure in the winningest football coach in Oklahoma University history. Thanks for allowing me to ride along on your amazing journey. Paul O'Brien. To my Uncle Jimmy, who taped WWF to VHS for me, who let me come to his home to watch wrestling anytime I wanted. I wouldn't have been able to fall in love with wrestling as a kid without your kindness toward me. To Mick Foley, who answered a tweet that started the magical journey for me and my writing in the wrestling world. I'll always be grateful. And to JR, thank you for taking the risk on asking a guy who you never met to help write your life story. I've never been so honored or anxious in having the voice of wrestling living in my head for 18 months. Thank you, friend. And that was Slobberknocker, My Life in Wrestling by Jim Ross with Paul O'Brien. I remember when the second book that was made telling Jim Ross's life story, when I found out that book was made, I instantly went for not just that book, but because I wanted to be up to date with everything, I got this book along with it. So I had both books. I literally bought both books together, and I, up until now, have not read this book all the way through. And I've yet to even read Under the Black Hat, which is the sequel book for his life story at this point in time. I very much my time with knowing Jim Ross. I grew up with WWE I grew up with WWE since October of 2007, at a time which I honestly had no idea about it. Like, at that point, I never really watched wrestling. Like, I did occasionally play. Someone that one of my other family members was with was a wrestling fan, and I did. He had like the WWF No Mercy in Nintendo 64 video game. He had this VHS tape that showed wrestling from the 80s. The one that I remember the most, my very first wrestling match I ever watched, actually would be Hulk Hogan, to my memory, Hulk Hogan versus King Kong Bundy in that steel cage match at WrestleMania 2. And I was a bit mixed about it. But one night I fell asleep and then I woke up and this person was watching WWE Raw, and this one thing that I remember was them talking about that moment on on the episode of Saturday Night's Main Event in 2006 where Hogan and Orton where Hulk Hogan and Randy Orton were talking to each other, and then Randy supposedly left, and Hogan was about to go to the passenger side or the driver's side of the car, and Orton just comes out of nowhere and RKO's him on the trunk of the car, and that would continue the feud that they had. What would lead up to what would ultimately be their match at SummerSlam that year. But officially, I did not get into professional wrestling until, or particularly WWE, until October of 2007. That was my very first time where I actually got into wrestling. Ironically, it was either that night or the night. It was either that first episode of Raw or the Raw after when John Cena got injured. I remember that very much. I remember that around the time I started watching wrestling, John Cena got a shoulder injury, a pectoral muscle tear injury. That's what was going on with him. Um, and So at first, I didn't really watch I never watched John Cena's work at that point. So I literally had no idea who these fucking people were. I had no idea who they were, why they were cheering some people, and why they were booing others. I literally had no idea. But as time went on, I started to understand the, you know, the viewer aspect of the wrestling business. So like the wrestling shows. So I understood that. Of course, I don't know the behind the scenes type of stuff. Because regardless of what I would know backstage, everything is they have to keep kayfabe. That's for damn sure. That's for damn sure. Even if people loved a heel wrestler, that heel wrestler had to still be an asshole because he was playing an asshole on TV. So he had to keep playing character. That's the whole point. They're not doing it to be assholes in real life. They're doing it because they're playing assholes on TV. That's why they gotta be assholes. That's why they gotta pretend to be assholes on, like, when fans come to them. That's how it is. Um, but yeah, let me just stay for the record that I fucking love Jim Ross. I love his work. He is, in my opinion, one of the best ring announcers, one of the best commentators, I should say, of all time. Right next, and I'm going to be honest with you here, I would put him right next to Don West, who I honestly have said, and I will still say this to the end of time, Don West was 100% TNA's Jim Ross, because he had the same the same feeling of intensity that I felt like he had, compared, like the same level of intensity that um, um, if not a little bit like he gave a good amount of intensity, storytelling kind of thing. He basically was Jim Ross in TNA. That's pretty much what Don West was. So yeah, but yeah, I fuck no matter how he's doing in AEW, I will always respect Jim Ross for the work ethic he has always put in for WWE, for all of these companies that he was in. He put in he put in 110 he put in 110% every time he could, even if he felt like it wasn't his best. You gotta admire a man who tries his damnedest to make a damn good a wrestling match look better than it was, or it was really good and he just happened to make it look better than what it was. You know what I'm saying? That's the whole point, as he put it himself. That's what he literally just said at the very end of the book. But yeah, I dude, honestly, I am such a wrestling fan. If I ever had the chance to meet Jim Ross in person, whether it be at a gathering event, like for wrestling fans, or anything, or like even given the opportunity to just have a one-on-one with him, just to just to talk to him, I would be happy with that. I would love to meet Jim Ross in real life, dude. I very much would. Even if it doesn't happen, I still would. Even if it doesn't happen, it's still a dream of mine to eventually see him. But in any case, I love this book. I would recommend it to any wrestling fan out there who ever wanted to know of Jim Ross's life story outside of me reading it to you. I highly recommend it. It's worth it. It was a great book. I loved it. But now I have to rate what I would give it if it was an MPAA movie. And the simple answer is I would have to give it an R rating because of the strong language throughout the book, because of a scene of sexual reference because of what Ric Flair did, that one moment in the book, use of tobacco. I don't know if he talked about alcohol, but he definitely was. But tobacco was definitely a recurring theme there. But mainly the strong language throughout, and that one's in that strong sexual reference, a scene of sexual reference being strong enough that I don't think a teenager needs to read that at all. Period. But yeah, definitely for language, for some description, for some violence. It's not like bad levels of violence. I feel like the violence is like on a PG-13 level, but given the fact that you got the two other things that I believe would be on the verge of an R rating, I have to put it there with it because it did have some violent moments in the book. I'll have to figure it out, but those are probably the three that I'm going with right now. But in any event, ladies and gentlemen, thank you guys so much for watching. And on the next reading stream, we are going to be reading not one, not two, but 3 separate books. And how am I doing this? Because I'm going to go through each book chapter by chapter. With the exception of, but I do have a few exceptions for this one, and I'm going to explain this in a community post tomorrow, just so everybody knows. If a chapter is less than 1 page, literally, let's say for example, a chapter started right here. If the chapter end does not line up with this moment, with this part right here, then I would, where the chapter technically starts, I would go on to the next chapter until we get to a chapter that fits it. So yeah, and I came up with that idea because this one book that I have titled Girl in Pieces has so many short 1-page chapters, sections, whatever, that I just felt like that rule had to be done. I just felt like that had to be applied. But in any event, that is the rule that I'm going to be doing. That is what I'll be doing. So join me tomorrow night, and I hope you enjoy what's going to happen. But like I said, though, because I'm doing 3 books. Oh yeah, by the way, because I also did say this. Because I'm doing 3 books, I'll be trying to. I'll have to look this up, but I'll be doing it to where I'll be doing the stream, and then once everything is all set up, I'll try to separate the books from each other, so that way people don't try to find. So that way it's not harder for people to try to find which book they really give a fuck about the most. So in this case, if I were to do Triangle Anxiety 2, Five Nights at Freddy's, and American Assassin, each chapter would be separated from the others. So that way, in a sections, so that way it would not be hard for people to figure out how to do that. Because I don't know how to do it right now. I feel like there might be a way for me to do that, but I'm not entirely sure how. But in any case, that's my plan for the moment. We'll see how it goes for me. But with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you guys for joining. Hope you guys enjoyed. And until next time, this is Force Walpole signing off.